By every rule of geography, Bermuda should not exist as a country. It has no rivers, no lakes, no underground water to speak of. It sits completely alone in the North Atlantic, closer to nowhere than anywhere directly in the path of the most violent hurricane corridor on Earth. It has no farmland worth naming, no minerals worth mining, and no neighbors worth trading with. It is, by all measurable logic, a cursed rock, and yet Bermuda is one of the wealthiest places on the entire planet. GDP per capita over $100,000, infrastructure that laughs at Category 5 storms, a financial sector that controls more global risk than most G7 nations. So how does a 21 square mile limestone island smaller than Manhattan, sitting alone in the deep Atlantic, become the nerve center of the world's trillion-dollar disaster economy? Here's what nobody tells you about Bermuda's wealth. It didn't come despite the hurricanes. It came because of them. But to understand how a small island learned to harvest catastrophe, we first have to understand why this island exists at all. Because geologically speaking, it really shouldn't. A rock that should not exist. Look at the Atlantic Ocean on a map. Let your eye travel east from the American coastline, past the Bahamas, past the edge of the Caribbean, and then keep going. Way past where the islands stop, past where the shipping lanes thin out. There, that tiny speck, that's Bermuda. The nearest land isn't another island. It's Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, 1,050 kilometers to the west. Sail due east from Bermuda, and you won't see land again until you crash into the coast of Morocco. 3,000 miles away, there is no archipelago to hide behind. No continental shelf to soften the swell. Bermuda is simply out there, alone. And its origin explains why. Millions of years ago, a geological hotspot punched through the ocean floor directly beneath this point in the Atlantic. Lava erupted. A volcano built itself from the seafloor, rising 4,500 meters through cold, dark water until finally it broke the surface. A mountain born in fire, surrounded by nothing. Then the volcano died, and it began to sink. But as it sank, something slow and extraordinary happened. Coral reefs formed around its rim. Over hundreds of thousands of years, as sea levels dropped and rose through successive ice ages, those reefs were exposed to wind, crushed into white sand, and compressed into limestone. So today, when you set foot on Bermuda, you are not standing on volcanic rock. You are standing on the fossilized remains of millions of years of dead coral, balanced on top of a drowned volcano in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That detail matters, because limestone, beautiful, ancient, sun-bleached limestone, is the source of Bermuda's most devastating geographic flaw. It is porous, completely, relentlessly porous. When rain falls on Bermuda, it doesn't collect. It doesn't pool. It simply filters straight down through the rock, mixes with seawater below, and disappears. No rivers, no lakes, no aquifers. On an island surrounded by hundreds of miles of salt water, the one thing you cannot drink is everywhere, and the one thing you need to survive is nowhere. By all logic, this island should have remained permanently, completely, uninhabited. For millions of years it was. Why the Spanish left and the English crashed? When Spanish captain Juan de Bermudez first spotted this island in 1505, he was not impressed. He was terrified. Ships that came too close found their hulls shredded on hidden reefs, lurking just beneath the surface, invisible until it was far too late. Those who survived long enough to reach shore heard something worse, screaming. Demonic, relentless shrieking echoing from the forests after dark. The Spanish named it La Isla de los Demonios, the Isle of Devils, and they left. The demons, as it turned out, were cowbirds, seabirds with a haunting mating call that sounds disturbingly close to something supernatural. mixed with the grunts of wild pigs abandoned by earlier wrecks. And suddenly Bermuda had a reputation that kept an entire colonial empire at bay for over a century. It would take a disaster to change that. In 1609, an English fleet of 9 ships was crossing the Atlantic, bound for Jamestown, Virginia, the struggling first permanent English settlement in the Americas. The flagship was the Sea Venture, carrying 150 colonists and the new governor of Virginia, Sir George Somers. Midway across the Atlantic, they sailed directly into a hurricane. Not a storm, a hurricane. The Sea Venture was taking on water faster than the crew could bail. For 3 days and 3 nights, every person on board bailed by hand, fighting a ship that was visibly dying beneath their feet. When land finally appeared through the storm, it was Bermuda. Somers made a decision. He deliberately drove the Sea Venture into the reef. They spent 10 months on the island, cutting local cedar trees, building 2 smaller ships from the wreckage, and waiting. And somewhere in those 10 months, something changed. Bermuda, the cursed, demonic, waterless rock, revealed itself as something else entirely. It was extraordinarily beautiful. The reefs teemed with fish. The cedar forest smelled of something ancient and clean. A handful of men decided they didn't want to leave, and by 1612, England officially claimed Bermuda as a colony. The Isle of Devils had become real estate.
What strikes you first is the sheer power of this place. But look closer, and you'll find resilience in the stillness between the waves.
But here's the thing about Bermuda that I want you to hold on to as we go through the next part of this story. Every single major turning point in Bermuda's history, the founding, the economy, the wealth, begins with a catastrophe. That pattern isn't a coincidence. It's a business model. Engineering around the impossible. The first problem the English colonists faced was the same one that had kept humans off this island forever: no water. Their solution is still visible today on every rooftop across Bermuda, and it's one of the most elegant pieces of architectural geography you'll find anywhere on Earth. They began carving their roofs out of the same local limestone that formed the island itself. They built them in a distinctive stepped terrace pattern, not for aesthetics, but for physics. Each step slows the rainwater, captures it, and funnels it downward. The entire surface is painted brilliant white, not for beauty, but because titanium dioxide in the limestone paint acts as a natural purifier, killing bacteria as water flows across it. Below each house, a cistern, a sealed underground tank that can hold months of drinking water. To this day, it is written into Bermuda's building code that every single structure on the island must catch its own rainwater this way, by law. You could drop Bermuda's entire land area into Lake Michigan and barely cause a ripple. The lake is over 1,500 times larger. Yet through this single architectural adaptation, 64,000 people have been meeting their own water needs on a limestone rock for 4 centuries. Problem solved. But one crisis leads directly to the next. When you can't farm, you sail. The colonists quickly learned that agriculture was a dead end. The limestone soil was too shallow, the island too small. Virginia and the Caribbean had the plantation model locked up. So Bermuda did what island nations throughout history have done when their land fails them: they turn to the water. The native Bermuda cedar was extraordinarily dense, rot-resistant, flexible under stress. It built ships that were famously fast and agile. And so Bermuda became a maritime economy. They dominated the regional salt trade, running routes between Turks and Caicos and the American mainland. They became skilled navigators. And for a while they became something more complicated: privateers. State-sponsored pirates. To put it plainly, with letters of marque from the British Crown, Bermudian captains legally intercepted enemy vessels and claimed their cargo. For decades, Bermuda's economy ran substantially on what the ocean gave them, whether the ocean gave it willingly or not. But privateering was eventually outlawed. The golden age of sail ended. The cedar forests were devastated by scale insects in the 1940s. One by one, Bermuda's economic engines died. And each time, the island was forced to reinvent itself.
This radical economic reinvention is centered around our Blue Economy initiative, harnessing the power of the ocean for sustainable growth and
The
prosperity.
last reinvention, the one that produced the wealth you see today, required Bermuda to do something almost no place on Earth has ever done. It had to turn its greatest vulnerability into its greatest product. Selling catastrophe to the world. To understand what Bermuda built, you first have to understand what the Atlantic was doing to it. Every year, warm water rises off the Gulf Stream, that oceanic conveyor belt that keeps Bermuda tropical and feeds energy into the storm systems forming off the African coast. Bermuda can't stop that water from warming. It can't move out of the way. What it can do is understand that system better than anyone else on Earth. And in the digital world, understanding exactly what's happening to your data, where it goes, who sees it, how it's tracked is its own kind of storm preparation. To understand how Bermuda makes its money, you need to understand a concept called reinsurance. Think of it this way. When a Category 5 hurricane hits the Gulf Coast, let's say it destroys 200,000 homes, the insurance companies covering those homes suddenly face billions of dollars in claims. All at once. No insurance company can absorb that shock alone. If they tried, they'd go bankrupt. The homeowners would get nothing. The economy would collapse. So those insurance companies buy their own insurance. They transfer a portion of their catastrophic risk, their worst-case scenario exposure, to a reinsurance company. The reinsurance company collects premiums in the quiet years, and when the catastrophe comes, they write the check. Now, where do the world's largest catastrophe reinsurance companies choose to base their operations? Hamilton, Bermuda. Population, 1,000 people. Financial exposure, hundreds of billions of dollars. This was not an accident. Bermuda's unique status as a British overseas territory gave it something extraordinary. The political stability and legal credibility of the British Empire, combined with the complete freedom to write its own tax code. And Bermuda made a choice: no corporate income tax. That combination, British-backed stability, zero corporate tax, and Bermuda's own centuries of hard-won knowledge about what hurricanes actually do to coastlines, made it the most attractive place on Earth to base a catastrophe insurance operation. By the 1980s, the reinsurance industry was clustering in Hamilton like nowhere else. After Hurricane Andrew devastated Florida in 1992, causing $27 billion in damages and bankrupting 11 insurance companies, the so-called Class of 1992 formed almost overnight. A wave of new Bermuda-based reinsurers capitalized specifically to handle the catastrophe market the existing industry couldn't handle. Today, following any major U.S. hurricane, Bermudian reinsurers typically pay out somewhere between 25 and 40% of all reconstruction claims. A 21-square-mile island is financially responsible for rebuilding significant portions of the American coastline every time a major storm hits. To put that another way, you could fit 150 Bermudas inside the state of Florida. Yet when Florida gets hit, it's often Bermuda writing the recovery check. And here's the counterintuitive part that makes this model extraordinary. As climate change accelerates ocean temperatures and makes hurricanes more frequent and more powerful, Bermuda's business doesn't shrink. It grows. Higher risk means higher premiums. Higher premiums mean more revenue. Bermudian reinsurance companies employ armies of climate scientists and catastrophe modelers running 24/7 simulations. They're not guessing. They are the most sophisticated weather risk analysts on Earth because their entire national economy depends on getting the math right. The island that was founded because a hurricane wrecked a ship in 1609 now profits when hurricanes wrecked the American coastline in 2024. What the postcards don't show. So what does all of this mean for the 64,000 people actually living here? Here is the painful paradox at the heart of Bermuda's success, and the part that never makes it into the travel brochures. Bermuda is an island with no resources that imports everything. Every liter of fuel, every piece of lumber, every car, nearly every item of food you see in a Bermuda grocery store has traveled hundreds of miles across open ocean to get there. Supply chain costs are staggering by default. Layer on top of that an influx of senior executives from global reinsurance companies, hedge funds, and law firms, all earning global salaries, all competing for real estate on a 21-square-mile island where nobody can build outward. Bermuda has consistently ranked as the most expensive place to live on Earth. Cost of living indices regularly put it above Monaco, Singapore, and Zurich. Earning $100,000 in Bermuda does not make you wealthy. It barely makes you comfortable. The nurses, the teachers, the construction workers, the people who make the island function at a human level, they are being slowly priced out of the place their grandparents built. Some commute by ferry from other islands. Some have simply left. This is the geography of Bermuda that the GDP numbers don't capture. An island that turned catastrophe into capital but couldn't protect its own people from the economic storm that success created. Remember what we said at the beginning. By every rule of geography, Bermuda should not exist as a country. And in a sense, it still shouldn't. The freshwater problem was never truly solved. It was rooted around by white limestone roofs. The hurricane problem was never truly escaped. It was monetized into a trillion-dollar industry. The isolation problem was never overcome. It was transformed into a competitive advantage. Bermuda didn't break the rules of geography. It found every single vulnerability in those rules, and it turned each one into an asset. No water architecture became the infrastructure. No agriculture, the sea became the economy. No resources, the law became the product. No protection from storms, the storms became the inventory. But here's the thing I want to leave you with, the thing that makes Bermuda more than just a clever financial story. The sea venture didn't choose to stop at Bermuda. It was forced there. George Summers didn't see potential in this island. He saw it as a last resort, a reef to crash into instead of a deep ocean grave. What became one of the wealthiest places on Earth began as someone's worst day. Bermuda was never discovered. It was survived. And everything that followed, the Cedar ships, the salt trade, the reinsurance towers, the $100,000 GDP is just 4 centuries of the same instinct. When the disaster comes, find the angle. If this made you think differently about how geography shapes economies, there's another story I think you'll find just as unsettling. The Dutch coastal engineering system that essentially holds back the entire North Sea, and what happens to the 12 million people living below sea level when the math eventually stops working. Because there's another island that made a similar bet, but instead of hurricanes, they bet on something far colder, far stranger, and far more politically complicated, and they lost.